This novel tells a tale of the darkest evil, unremitting pursuit, and cruel vengeance. Prague, 1995. 10-year-old Kate, a lively girl who believed her mother had died giving birth to her, walked hand in hand with her father Seamus Lacey through Prague's old Jewish cemetery. Surrounded by centuries-old tombstones crammed together, Kate was awestruck and quietly asked why the graves were so close. Seamus, a large, thoughtful man, explained that sometimes people, blinded by their beliefs, do terrible things in the name of what they think is right. When Kate replied that Christ and his apostles were Jewish, Seamus fell silent. Later, passing a torture museum poster, Kate asked about it. Seamus admitted the world was complicated, and people sometimes do terrible things, though often the victims are said to deserve it. When Kate asked if that made it right, Seamus hesitated before answering, "Guess so, princess, guess so." By 2020, Kate had graduated from Harvard with a law degree, was divorced, and was working as a helper with some nuns in the Australian outback when she received a message that Seamus was dead. In great shock, she decided to return to New York immediately. On arrival in New York, Kate found herself heir to Seamus's vast empire and his billions. She appointed Seamus's private secretary, Troy, as her CEO, who told her that Seamus had shot himself. She decided to purchase an island in the Caribbean where she could guillotine the person who had caused Seamus's suicide, and hired Ed, an ex-Green Beret, to find at any cost the person who caused Seamus's suicide. Ed attended Seamus's funeral service at St. Patrick's Cathedral, attended also by celebrities and politicians. At the wake, Ed overheard Janet, the wife of Seamus's old friend Mike Keller, saying to Mike, "The fragment is dead and gone, you've got to make sure." Kate was convinced that Mike was her target. 9 months later, Kate was in a chopper landing at Ibis Key, the beautiful island she had purchased in the Caribbean for $110 million. Ed and Troy were on the island already, which they had been setting up with non-English speaking staff, Wi-Fi, and modern electronic devices. The work office was accommodated in one of the buildings and amenities installed by the previous owner. A few months previously, Ed had returned from a trip overseas, and Kate was conversant with the 500-page report he had provided. Seamus and Mike had been mining engineering students at the University of Montana and were employed as underground miners during a vacation at Kalgoorlie, in Western Australia, when they discovered a huge reef of gold on the outskirts of the town. They sold the mining rights to the reef for millions, and Seamus developed his wealth by investing in mining companies and the like, while Mike disappeared from public view. Mike, however, was immensely wealthy. Ed's report further revealed that following his payment of millions of dollars in bribes to various bank officials, Mike was the sole owner of a number of completely blind companies. One named Gwalia Inc. was located in Belize, and the other named Ora Banda Inc. in the British Virgin Islands. Billions flowed into these companies from other blind companies across the world. Gwalia and Ora Banda were the names of gold rush towns in Western Australia reachable from Kalgoorlie, the gold rush capital. This had prompted Ed's visit to Kalgoorlie, where he found that at the time of the discovery of the reef, the bodies of 2 murdered young prostitutes had been found in an abandoned mine tunnel outside of Boulder, a suburb of Kalgoorlie. Kate had decided that in order to try Mike for his responsibility for the death of Seamus, that she would bring to the key a judge, a prosecutor, and a defense attorney. They would be offered huge sums of money for their participation and later silence. There would be no jury. During the purchase of the key, Troy flew to Cayenne, the capital of French Guiana, where he paid a large sum for a working guillotine, crated and ready for shipment. He interviewed several legal outcasts and made financial arrangements with 3. The judge was Sir Frederick, a Queen's Counsel, formerly of the High Court of Justice in England and Wales, who was dismissed due to gambling-related bankruptcy. A chopper soon delivered Sir Frederick, whom Kate instructed to maintain formality, avoid socializing, and act as though seconded abroad on official duty. He would try Mike Keller for the suicide of Seamus Lacey and, if found guilty, impose a death sentence by guillotine. There would be no jury, and he had full discretion as to conduct of the trial, regardless of cost. Another chopper, later that day, brought the prosecutor, Mario, a disbarred Illinois attorney, and the defense counsel, Hamish, a disbarred solicitor from Scotland. Neither Sir Frederick, Ed, Mario, nor Hamish was to be addressed by their surname, for reasons of anonymity. The court convened the next day at the convention centre on the Quay. At Mario's request, proceedings were adjourned for 2 months, 1 month for him to prepare his evidence, and 1 month for Hamish to prepare his evidence in response. All documentation was to be exchanged between Mario and Hamish, but not given to Sir Frederick or Kate. Mario then abruptly told Ed they would depart for Western Australia the next day. Ed and Mario flew into Kalgoorlie on a chartered jet, Ed jet-lagged but experienced, Mario cold, calculating, and on a mission. Their target was a decades-old mystery, 2 young women strangled and dumped in an abandoned mine tunnel in the 1980s. The girls had come to Kalgoorlie, like many before them, to earn quick money in the brothels that lined Hay Street, a street of red lights. Their deaths made headlines, briefly. Then the story vanished, buried by their powerful families and a system that recorded their names only as Carol Smith and Hope Jones. Ed's report was meticulous. Mario didn't like him, but couldn't deny the quality of his work. Together, they searched the streets and ancient hotels of Kalgoorlie, chasing whispers and old memories. A break came at a rundown bar in a once grandiose hotel. They approached an old miner named Curly, full of crude stories and long-buried truths. He remembered the girls. And he remembered 2 young Americans, Seamus and Mike, who had struck gold and disappeared. Curly referred to a prostitute who was known as Merle at the time of the murders, but was Lady Bredon at the present time. Mario and Ed managed to locate Lady Elizabeth Bredon, widow of the late Sir Cecil Bredon, who lived in an imposing colonial mansion in Perth. Though initially startled and visibly shaken by their questions, Lady Bredon eventually admitted to having worked in a Kalgoorlie brothel during the 1980s under the name of Merle. She confirmed that she had known the 2 murdered sex workers, Carol and Hope, and revealed that Carol had been romantically involved with one of the American mining students and had been pregnant at the time of her death. At Lady Bredon's suggestion, they tracked down Charlie, the now-retired police inspector who had led the original investigation. Charlie, though elderly, was sharp and candid. Charlie confirmed that Carol had confided in a colleague that she had deliberately removed her diaphragm in order to become pregnant by the American man that she loved and hoped to marry. Charlie admitted that political pressure from Canberra, the Australian capital, had forced the case to be closed prematurely and the victims to be quietly buried. He expressed deep remorse for having capitulated under orders, calling it the greatest regret of his career. With little hope of finding anything in the official records, Mario and Ed concluded their search in Australia. Ed speculated that the findings might undermine Mario's prosecution of Mike Keller, but Mario remained resolute and determined to press on. The Korean caterers served breakfast in the Quay's elegant restaurant, where native flowers and immaculately dressed waiters completed the refined setting. Kate, Hamish, and the recently arrived Sir Frederick dined alone. Hamish had attempted small talk with Kate, who gave a cold response. Irritated, he left the restaurant and walked to the pier, where a large launch was docking. A massive wooden crate was expertly unloaded by Koreans under Troy's supervision. When Hamish asked about it, Troy casually revealed it was a guillotine for Mike Keller. Visibly stunned, Hamish stormed off, determined to confront someone. Hamish interrupted Sir Frederick's breakfast and demanded answers. Sir Frederick, calm and deliberate, reminded Hamish they had all knowingly signed on to something dark. Execution was always on the table. He advised Hamish to keep quiet, do his job, and disappear afterward if he wanted to live. Shaken, Hamish wandered outside, comparing himself to a doomed drug mule, and found Kate relaxing under a pergola. His anger flared, but Kate firmly reminded him he had taken the money and the risk. She dismissed him coldly, keeping their relationship strictly professional. Meanwhile, Troy had the crate containing the guillotine transported on a dump truck to a secluded spot on the island's high ground, where it was unloaded by the rough terrain crane and hidden beneath a tarpaulin until required. In early 1999, in the mountainous region outside Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, a group of young Ukrainian girls, including 17-year-old Klara Baranova, arrived under deeply troubling circumstances. Drawn in by a misleading job advertisement that promised work as nannies for affluent families in Italy, Klara and several other teenagers left their homes in Kiev with hopes of finding new opportunities abroad. What followed was a long and difficult journey across Eastern Europe that ended far from where they expected. Klara had come from a difficult background, marked by instability and hardship. Eager to escape her environment, she responded to the job posting and was soon ushered into a world she did not understand. She was transported with other girls in a van through multiple countries, with little information about where they were going or what awaited them. When they finally reached Sarajevo, the girls were taken to a private establishment controlled by a group involved in human trafficking sex slaves. One of the senior figures in this operation was a man named Bronco, whose authority was unquestioned. Life at the facility was strictly controlled. The girls were cut off from the outside world and subjected to a system designed to keep them compliant and dependent. Over the next 2 decades, Klara endured many challenges. Most of the girls who had traveled with her eventually disappeared from the scene, some due to illness, others under unknown circumstances. Klara, however, proved resourceful and resilient and became a hardened prostitute. Over time, she learned to speak several languages fluently, developed computer skills, and gradually earned a position of trust within the organization. Bronco, now the manager of operations in Bosnia, recognized Klara's intelligence and capabilities. He promoted her to serve as his assistant, placing her in charge of administrative and logistical matters. In 2020, while summer heat scorched Kalgoorlie, winter gripped Prague. In a smoky upstairs office near the Old Town Square, Klara Baranova, now operating under the alias Klara Cernova, managed a vast and ruthless sex trafficking enterprise known as the Agency. In her mid-30s, hardened by years in the trade, Klara sat behind her desk, chain-smoking galaxies and overseeing a staff of 22. Her business facilitated the trafficking of young girls and boys from Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union to brothels and darker destinations across the globe: France, Italy, the Netherlands, Israel, Morocco, Argentina, Brazil, Macau, and beyond. The operation was unrelenting. Young victims were treated as expendable commodities, their freshness sold and resold until worn out, at which point they were replaced. Klara's role was to ensure the constant replenishment and supply. Although Klara appeared to own the agency, she was only a cog in a much larger machine, connected to powerful criminal networks, particularly the Russian mafia. Following the collapse of communism, trafficking routes had opened up, and the movement of victims across borders became streamlined. Some of the procurement and logistics now happened online, with some victims lured by fake job offers, but most were abducted in brutal fashion, echoing the horrors of the African slave trade centuries earlier. At the same time, Mario and Ed, investigating financial corruption linked to a sprawling laundering operation, were en route to Prague. They had just uncovered critical evidence, a USB drive from a bribed Dutch banker containing 2 decades of transactions tied to a shell company named Ora Banda Incorporated. The trail pointed to Mike Keller as the sole beneficiary, with no sign of his supposed partner, Seamus Lacey. The money moved like rivers into a vast financial Amazon, through Ora Banda, then to Gwalia Incorporated, and finally into Mike's business accounts. One major tributary feeding the system was the agency, hence their interest in Prague. After an exhausting journey from Perth via Singapore and Frankfurt, Mario and Ed landed in Prague and checked into the Renaissance Hotel, within walking distance of the agency. The next morning, they navigated the narrow, cobbled streets of the old quarter, ignoring tourist attractions and flyers for orchestral concerts. They located the agency above a museum of medieval torture instruments. A nondescript door bore only the warning VSTUP Zakazan, no admittance. Ed tried the handle. It opened. Inside, they found what looked like a computer sweatshop, 24 men and women working silently at terminals in a smoke-filled room. One by one, the workers fell silent and stared at the intruders. They all knew what their work enabled: fake job ads leading children into sexual slavery. Though the agency had never been raided, the tension suggested that everyone feared this might be the day. Clara emerged from her office, alarmed by the sudden quiet. Seeing Mario and Ed, she prepared to call for backup, legal and otherwise. But when Mario spoke in English and made vague threats, she relaxed, thinking it was just business. Attempting to make a call, she was stopped by Ed, who covered the phone and demanded information on the agency's real ownership, its operations, and a full data dump onto a USB flash drive. Clara balked, claiming ownership and threatening police involvement. But when Ed offered money, $2 million in exchange for her cooperation and future testimony, her interest peaked. After a tense negotiation, she agreed to provide the data and speak confidentially on video, in exchange for $500,000 up front and the remainder held in escrow, payable in 6 months. She would be free to disappear into Europe under a new identity. Ed left to retrieve the funds while Mario stayed behind to ensure she didn't change her mind. Clara, stunned but persuaded, considered her options: freedom, safety, and a new life. When Ed returned 40 minutes later with a bank check, she took it, closed her office door, and began talking. Mario hit record on his phone and handed her a USB flash drive as the truth behind the agency began to unfold. Mario and Ed had spent the previous night in Hong Kong before arriving in Shenyang, northeastern China, via a shaky domestic flight. After enduring the chaotic traffic of the sprawling industrial city, they reached the Shining Moon Export Corporation, tucked beside a seedy bar in a dim alleyway. Inside, they encountered a smoky, overcrowded room filled with young men at outdated computers and a towering, intimidating Mongolian man named Dong. Although Dong initially greeted them with suspicion, even pointing a silenced pistol at their heads, the tension eased when Ed and Mario claimed to represent a British employment agency seeking young nannies and offered substantial payment. As the conversation progressed, they began probing deeper into Shining Moon's operations, particularly the flow of funds and connections to the West. This shift in tone reignited Dong's hostility, and he warned them ominously about the chance of walking out alive for such a small amount that they had offered him. A deal was cut to Dong's satisfaction. Southern Sudan had been rich in oil, and that wealth had drawn foreign interests and masked widespread abuses. Chinese involvement in Sudan was vast. Planes regularly arrived with Chinese, some of whom had been trafficked under the guise of employment. Among them was Shu, a 16-year-old girl from northeastern China. Sold by her parents, she found herself in a truck headed north, comforting younger children while guarded by armed men. Eventually, Shu was placed in a household in Port Sudan, forced into grueling labor. Over time, her intelligence led to a shift in her duties, from domestic work to office responsibilities, managing the records of her master, Hamid, a wealthy arms and cotton trader who had physically mistreated her. Despite this change, Shu harbored a growing resolve to escape her situation and seek justice. Her opportunity came when she encountered a fellow Chinese national during an arms shipment inspection. She proposed a deal that led to a calculated and decisive act. Hamid was killed, and Shu fled with a truckload of weapons and Hamid's business files. Years later, she emerged as the head of a powerful trading operation in arms and humankind, having transformed her fate through resilience, cunning, and a will to survive. Mario and Ed had flown into Khartoum, the capital of the Sudan, the night before. They had decided to make Khartoum their next port of call. Although they had amassed a lot of raw data by paying massive bribes in Prague and Shenyang, they had nothing to tie back to Mike other than that he had access to all the billions paid into Gwalia Incorporated. They needed a positive make on him. They had figured together, now that Mario's initial enmity had evaporated, that they might have a better shot at it in some remote third-world location. There was no particular reason, just mutual gut feelings. They had evidence of substantial funds being channeled out of Khartoum into Ora Banda. They had a name, African Hope Limited, located just off the wide cornice beside the Blue Nile. They walked out of their hotel in the city, located on the western bank of the river. In Khartoum, the British General Charles, Chinese, Gordon was killed in 1885 by the followers of the Mahdi, an Islamic fundamentalist. Gordon, who had previously put down the Boxer Rebellion in China during the Second Opium War and hence Chinese, had been governor of Sudan, opposed to the trafficking of black slaves by the Arabs in northern Sudan. He had been killed by the Mahdi's followers only 2 days before the late arrival of a British relief column. The Mahdiist forces slaughtered thousands of the defenders of Khartoum. 13 years later, Lord Kitchener exacted a terrible revenge on the Mahdeists at the Battle of Omdurman. Winston Churchill, who was present as a young trooper, wrote to his mother in 1899, "I shall merely say that the inhuman slaughter of the wounded disgraced the victory of Omdurman and that Kitchener was responsible for this." Khartoum was a dusty city of the new and the old. Modern cars mingled with donkey carts in the streets. Uninspiring brick apartment buildings were interspersed between older single-story buildings, many decrepit with crumbling mud bricks. Most men wore white turbans and long, dazzling white robes, setting off their ebony skin. The women were veiled and swathed in ankle-length garments. Ed and Mario sought the address of African Hope from an English-speaking policeman, and after being told that the location was within walking distance, they set out on foot. It was a pleasant walk in the early morning. A light breeze blew off the Nile, playing against their faces as they made their way from shadow to shadow cast by the leafy trees interspersed along the corniche. They found the building with little trouble, using a passerby to translate the sign in Arabic, which proclaimed the 2-story, grey concrete building to be the headquarters of African Hope. They walked into an unattended air-conditioned lobby. Ed rattled a small brass bell on the reception desk. After a wait of about 30 seconds, a door opened, and a woman walked into the lobby. They were not surprised to see that she was Chinese. Like Clara, Shu had been hardened by a life exposed to vice. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Shu asked in perfect English, assuming they were there to transact business. Ed and Mario silently appraised the woman. She was dressed in a traditional Chinese plum blossom, mid-length cheongsam accentuating her slender neck, shiny black hair, and delicate features. She was indeed beautiful and poised to boot. Mario took a deep breath and then launched into the usual spiel. Shu finally agreed to participate in a video conference and deliver full ownership details of African Hope and all its business and financial records on a USB flash drive for a total payment of $4 million US. Ed arranged the usual bank payment procedure. As they returned to the Corniche, Mario told Ed, "None of the 3 we interviewed ever knew Seamus, only Mike. We have to get back and analyze the data. It's the only way to establish if Seamus was involved." "Good luck with that," Ed replied nonchalantly, his hands in his pockets and interrupting his whistling of Rule Britannia in remembrance of days long gone. Ed and Mario reviewed their findings from their 3-week overseas mission. They had gathered extensive data on Mike's illegal empire, consisting of white slavery, drug and armament trafficking, tax havens, and massive earnings. But they still had no direct link to Seamus's suicide. Mario lamented the lack of conclusive proof despite the millions spent. Ed, ever casual, reminded Mario that Kate could afford it and left the next move to Mario. Meanwhile, in Miami, Mike Keller sat in his luxurious home, reviewing global operations with his trusted aide, Jake. They discussed booming markets in Australia, Brazil, and beyond in sex trafficking, legal brothels, and drugs shipped in concealed containers. Mike prided himself on staying out of U.S. operations to avoid any heat. 3 nights later, Bud, an ex-Green Beret comrade of Ed's, disguised in black, infiltrated Mike's mansion. He sedated Mike and abducted him silently. With help from Troy, they transported Mike to a chopper using fake IDs and flight plans. After a 24-hour journey, Mike, groggy and sedated, woke just as they approached the quay. Hamish was having breakfast when he spotted Ed and Bud escorting a groggy, handcuffed man in blue pajamas, clearly Mike Keller, toward the bungalows. Hamish rushed to Kate, demanding answers. Kate coolly confirmed it was Mike, warning Hamish he'd be told when he could speak to him. Furious, Hamish demanded access immediately. Kate called Ed to recheck security and reluctantly agreed that Hamish could speak to Mike, under guard. Once inside the apartment that was his prison, Mike erupted with confusion, demanding to know what was going on. Hamish introduced himself to Mike as his defense counsel and briefly explained the setup by telling him that Kate, Seamus's daughter, owned the island and had arranged a trial without a jury. If convicted of causing Seamus's suicide, Mike would be executed by guillotine. Mike panicked, calling it a lynching. Hamish said he would play along for the present and look for a way for them to escape. Mike pressed for details. Hamish revealed damning evidence compiled by Ed that tied Mike to trafficking and money laundering. Mike insisted it was all unrelated to Seamus's death. Hamish outlined his legal strategy: challenge everything, investigate nothing, and let the burden fall on the prosecution. Later, at sunset, Hamish joined Kate on the balcony and hinted at ending the travesty. She rebuffed him. Mario arrived, and Hamish pressed Kate again. Kate refused angrily and left. Mario warned Hamish to stay quiet or risk being killed. From the shadows, Ed listened. Hamish approached the bungalow under cover of darkness and knocked out the armed Korean guard outside Mike's door with a swift strike. After binding and gagging him, he used the guard's keys to enter the room. Mike woke in shock, but Hamish assured him he was there to help them escape. He told him that his combative skills came from time he had spent in the Territorial Army. Hamish laid out the plan: reach the PA, steal a boat, and flee. They made it to the dock, where Hamish knocked out the armed guard with a blow to the head. On board the high-speed launch moored at the pier, Hamish tried to hotwire the engine, but before they could get away, Ed and an armed guard stormed aboard. The attempted escape was over. Back at the compound, Kate berated them. Mike snapped back and was slapped in the face by Kate, drawing blood. Kate demanded that Hamish declare his loyalty. He agreed to defend Mike but warned he would still try to escape. Kate warned there would be no more chances and ordered Mike cuffed and guarded. Hamish was to remain uncuffed but watched. Ed, aware of Kate's affection for Hamish, instructed the guards that if trouble arose, they were to shoot Hamish in the leg, not the head or torso. In the temporary courtroom on the Ibis Quay, the trial proceedings unfolded under the presiding authority of Sir Frederick. The court was filled with tension as Mario, representing the prosecution, prepared to present witnesses. Clara Cernova, a key witness, testified to her involvement in an illicit international sex trade, revealing shocking details about her own horrific experiences. She identified Mike Keller, present in the courtroom, as the man who had orchestrated the trafficking operation she once managed. As Mario questioned Clara, it became clear that the case was far from straightforward. He introduced a photograph of Seamus Lacey, whom Kate identified as her father, bringing further complexity to the situation. Hamish, Mike Keller's defense attorney, objected to the prosecution's line of questioning, suggesting it was irrelevant. However, Sir Frederick allowed the proceedings to continue amidst mounting tension. Clara's testimony revealed that she had been paid to fabricate details about Seamus Lacey's involvement in the sex trade, casting doubt on her credibility. This led Hamish to argue that the entire trial was a farce designed to convict Mike Keller unjustly. Sir Frederick, referencing English common law, reiterated the prosecution's burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After considering the evidence, he stated that he would not hear the evidence of Dong and Shu by video link as he would be unable to observe their demeanor in person, and would dismiss the charge against Mike Keller. Kate, furious with the pending verdict, demanded that the court hear a new witness due to arrive later that day before passing judgment. Sir Frederick consented, and the trial was adjourned until the next day. The tension between the court's participants was palpable. As the courtroom cleared, Mario and Hamish discussed their growing frustration with the situation, realizing that they were trapped in a web of manipulation and deceit. Clara, left in limbo as a witness, was reminded by Mario that her future was uncertain, depending on Kate's next move. The next day, all of those attending were present in the temporary courtroom before 9. Mario and Hamish took their places at the bar table. Kate, Troy, and Ed were seated behind them. Mike was escorted in by a Korean guard and then slouched in his chair, showing disdain. Sir Frederick entered, and all but Mike stood in respect. Mario announced the arrival of a voluntary witness, Lady Bredon, who was seated and informed by Sir Frederick that her evidence would be accepted without an oath as a friend of the court. She expressed her decision to speak out despite knowing it would end her peaceful retirement. Lady Bredon confirmed she had known both Seamus Lacey and Mike Keller, and had lied previously about not remembering their names, and recalled a pregnant sex worker named Carol who claimed Mike was the father. Mike insulted her, prompting a stern warning from Sir Frederick. Lady Bredon explained she had buried the truth out of shame and fear, but now felt compelled to reveal it. She recounted a night in the 1980s in Kalgoorlie, when Seamus and Mike, in trouble over pregnancies they caused, had come to her brothel for help. They said Carol and Hope threatened to accuse them of rape unless they married them. Merle, later Lady Bredon, agreed to help, for a price. Later, Merle and a driver dumped 2 bodies, Carol and Hope, near a sealed mine shaft outside Boulder. Back in court, silence followed her testimony. Sir Frederick called a lunch break and reminded Lady Bredon not to discuss the case. Mike exploded in rage, but Sir Frederick exited, and the others followed as a guard led Mike away. Everyone except Mike and the guard partook in the buffet in the Ibis Key cafeteria. Sir Frederick and Hamish sat alone at separate tables. Kate approached Hamish and asked if he still found her attractive. Hamish, weary, affirmed he always told the truth. Their conversation escalated, Hamish expressed frustration, and Kate left the cafeteria after a tense exchange. Sir Frederick, observing, muttered about potential trouble. In the temporary courtroom, Lady Bredon testified about her past with Cecil Bredon, revealing their involvement in the murders of Carol and Hope to obtain a share of Seamus and Mike's wealth. She stated that both Mike and Hamish were aware of the killings. Mike reacted angrily and was gagged by order of Sir Frederick. Lady Bredon detailed how she and Cecil moved to Perth, married, and became part of the social elite, with their past remaining hidden. She recounted that Seamus and Mike paid them regularly to keep their secrets. She stated that in the late 1990s, in Perth, Seamus approached her and proposed that she manage operations in Australia, as his and Mike's business expanded into sex and drugs. Despite initial reluctance, she had agreed due to their shared criminal past. She became Seamus's de facto Asian manager, traveling extensively and developing a personal relationship with him. During her testimony, Lady Bredon identified a photograph of a young Kate Lacey, noting Seamus had cherished such photos. She confirmed the handwriting on the back as Seamus's but stated she was unaware of its significance. Kate, upset, accused Lady Bredon of lying to protect Mike, that led to a warning from Sir Frederick. Hamish cross-examined Lady Bredon, confirming her views on Seamus and Mike's evil nature and the likelihood of many wanting them dead. She denied any specific knowledge of the reasons leading to Seamus's suicide and stated her purpose was to confess her past before dying. Sir Frederick expressed doubt about Mike's innocence and suggested that he testify, which Mike agreed to do. Mike, defiant, denied all allegations, claiming his wealth came from mining partnerships with Seamus. Under cross-examination by Mario, Mike became agitated and eventually admitted that he threatened to expose Seamus's desire to leave their criminal activities, leading to Seamus's suicide. Sir Frederick cited Mike's admission and found him guilty of contributing to Seamus's suicide and sentenced him to death. Mike reacted with hysteria and attempted to flee, but was subdued. Hamish and Mario, realizing the severity of the outcome, discussed intervening to prevent the execution, acknowledging their complicity if they did not act. Mario and Hamish entered the room where Sir Frederick was packing and urged him to stop the execution, calling it murder. Sir Frederick refused, claiming he was powerless and was leaving immediately. Hamish warned that none of them would be allowed to leave. Sir Frederick ignored them and, carrying his suitcase, approached Ed and Troy at the helipad and demanded a helicopter. Ed denied his request and said no one was leaving without Kate's approval. Troy reiterated that and ordered the guards to monitor Sir Frederick, Hamish and Mario closely. The trio was taken back to the courtroom under protest. Later, Ed summoned Hamish to speak with Kate, who revealed her plan to carry out the execution in a few days and send everyone else off the island as soon as possible. She asked Hamish to stay, but he refused. Kate insisted. That night, as in the night before, Kate CCME'd to sleep in his room, as she feared being alone at night. Hamish subdued Kate, tied her up, and knocked out 2 guards. He freed Mike, gave him a rifle, and instructed him on how to use it. They decided to use Kate as a hostage. They led a bound Kate to an SUV and tried to escape, but were spotted. A firefight broke out, and the SUV crashed. Guards recaptured them and freed Kate, who slapped Hamish and vowed revenge. She directed Troy to arrange the transportation of the majority of the guards and all of the staff from the quay, while ensuring that Hamish remained. In her office the next day, Kate told Hamish the execution would proceed, and he would witness it. He protested, but Kate insisted and accused him of betrayal. When Hamish demanded to see Mike, she refused and ordered Hamish to be removed and cuffed. Sir Frederick, Lady Bredon, Mario, and Clara stood at the helipad with their luggage, preparing to board the hired chopper that had arrived the previous day, but had already left the quay. As the pilot received instructions from Ed, a hidden explosive device with a flashing red readout was concealed beneath the chopper, which Ed had attached the previous night. Once all were aboard, the chopper lifted off over the ocean. In the tense silence, Lady Bredon asked Sir Frederick if he believed Kate would proceed with the execution. He replied that she most likely would, though no one could be certain. Lady Bredon then confessed that Mike had never been her lover, contrary to what he had claimed. She recounted an incident from the 1980s in Perth. In a flashback, a young, intoxicated Mike had entered Lady Bredon's mansion, accused her of being a murderer, and assaulted her violently. She explained to Sir Frederick that she couldn't report it, as she and her husband were involved in serious crimes and maintaining their public image was paramount. Her life had since been plagued by guilt, fear, and sleepless nights. She implied Sir Frederick also knew that feeling. At the same time, 2 SUVs ascended a hill to a platform covered with a tarpaulin. Kate, Troy, and a handcuffed Hamish exited one vehicle, Ed and a shackled Mike exited the other. Ed removed the tarpaulin to reveal a guillotine, previously unpacked by Ed, Bud, and Troy. Mike began screaming in terror. Ed tested the blade, then strapped Mike to the upright board, rotated it so his head was under the blade, and secured him with a yoke. Back in the chopper, Lady Bredon referred to the early photograph of Kate and its hidden message. Sir Frederick expressed interest, but was interrupted before she could explain further. On the hill, Kate gave Troy a nod, prompting him to press buttons on his phone. Seconds later, the chopper exploded mid-air, plunging into the ocean in a fireball. As the guillotine awaited its fatal task, Kate nodded at Ed to release the blade. Hamish cried out no. In desperation, Mike shouted that he was Kate's father and Merle was her mother. Kate screamed to stop. Just as Ed pulled the lever, Kate stood in shock at the foot of the guillotine, staring down at Mike's severed head lying beside her feet. His body was slumped across the blood-soaked device, a stream of blood pooling on the ground. Inwardly, she acknowledged the enormity of what had occurred. She thought, I have just murdered both my parents, but I must be strong. She turned to Troy and Ed and gave them clear, unwavering instructions. She ordered them to cremate Mike and scatter his ashes over the ocean, and to wash down the guillotine, transport it to the pier in its crate using the rough terrain crane, and dump it into the sea. Once those tasks were complete, Troy was to give Hamish and Ed $20 million each and ensure both men disappeared forever. Then Troy was to return to the New York office. 3 weeks later, back in the New York office, Kate informed Troy that she wanted him to arrange an enduring power of attorney through their attorneys, granting him full authority to act on her behalf without limitation. She handed him all instructions in writing, including her final wishes to place $20 million in an offshore account in her name, pay $20 million to himself, sell the entire business, donate all remaining funds to a list of specified charities, and then disappear forever, as she would. Over the following years, Kate found living with the burden of what she had done increasingly difficult. One morning, while passing a Catholic church in Manhattan, she entered to say a prayer. Inside, she noticed people waiting in a pew beside the confessional, seeking absolution for their sins. She took her place, and when it was her turn, she received absolution, but only on the condition that she devote the rest of her life to God. Determined to atone, Kate chose to join a monastic contemplative order of nuns who lived in complete seclusion from the outside world. She selected Belize as her destination, not only because it was the scene of her crimes, but also due to its English-speaking population, predominant Catholic faith, and membership of the British Commonwealth as former British Honduras, possessing the British legal system. She entered a monastery just outside Belize City and, over time, was professed as a nun, taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. She donated all her money to the church and embraced a life of prayer and contemplation. Years passed, and Kate, now known as Sister Kathleen, was 70 years old. One morning, she was awakened at 5 o'clock, as usual, by her alarm clock on her simple bedside table. After kneeling to say a decade of the Rosary, she showered, dressed in her habit with some difficulty, and slowly made her way down the corridor to attend daily Mass alongside the other aging sisters. Following Mass, she ate a modest breakfast in the refectory. Kate turned pale as she was about to leave when the Mother Superior approached and informed her that 2 police officers were waiting to speak with her in the lobby. The moment she had dreaded for over 30 years had finally arrived. Upon entering the lobby, the 2 female police officers rose and introduced themselves. The senior officer addressed her, "Kathleen Lacey, I am arresting you for the murder of Michael Keller and 5 others. You are not obliged to say anything unless you wish, but whatever you say will be taken down in writing and may be used in evidence." Troy had made a deathbed confession, and as there was no statute of limitations on serious crimes in Belize, the authorities had finally come for her. She remembered her conversation with Hamish in the Prague cemetery 60 years before, when he told her that sometimes people do dreadful things to other folk for no good reason, but on most occasions, the bad folk get what they deserve. Mike and Hamish had received their punishments, and she was about to receive hers.